Hi there. Welcome back to Discovery. You are here at the final leg of Discovery, the final part. My name is Yaakov Salomon. I'll be your host for the final leg of Discovery, and it has been quite a ride, has it not? Quite a journey. Well, Discovery has been an amazing thing, has been for so many years, and still is today. Let's go back a little bit, a quick review, and then we'll get into the remarkable ending, which I guarantee you will not be disappointing. People just wait for this final thing. If you haven't ever seen it before, I think you're in for a treat. So the final leg of Discovery, we'll go back and look at what we started to do in the beginning of Discovery. And we have a book, 5 books of Moses, what we call the written Torah. And the question is, where did it come from? Pretty good question. Is it true? Is it possible that this can actually be a divine book given to us by God 3,332 years ago? Is that really a possibility? As absurd as it may be to some people, we have given quite a bit of evidence towards that regard. Or you look at the alternative and say, you know what? This is really made by people, human beings. And, it's a smart book. It's got a lot of wisdom in it, but not exactly divine. That is a big difference between those two choices, right? If you choose the first choice, then you're living according to the word of God. And that means a lot. It will change just about everything that you do. But if you don't, if you leave the second one, then you're pretty much on your own, which maybe some people would prefer, I don't know. But what is the truth? Now, I told you to be the jury before, and you're looking at the evidence, and we've shown you a lot of evidence. We started out with an idea about mammals, and the idea that but we figured out and we understood that the author was correct. There's only one mammal in the world that has split hooves but does not chew its cud, which is the pig. We had the fish, the fins and scales. How did they know that there's no fish in the sea with scales without fins? And yet they were correct. And we had the Shemitah, the 7-year agricultural cycle, with the, I guess, ridiculous solution to how to solve it. And it doesn't matter if we starve or not. And somehow it worked. And then we had the codes, the hidden codes of the Torah. Amazing. Everybody is just blown away by it because there's so much in there. These are predictions that are made by the author, hidden in code in the Torah, and clearly with mathematical significance. And then we had the 7 wonders of Jewish history. Remarkable and contradictory predictions about we have an eternal nation, but at the same time, they're so tiny and everybody hates them and they're scattered and dispersed, and yet they're the light unto the nations. The whole thing makes no sense. And then on top of it all, it is predicted, prognosticated in advance in the Torah. And then we have the transmission. No other nation, no other religion in the entire world, in all of history, has ever claimed that God spoke to all of them. Nobody ever did that. And here we are. And it's the only claim you can make, and it be real. Unless if it didn't happen, then you can't make that claim. So we have a transmission process. We have codes. We have 7 wonders of Jewish history. Unbelievable. And then we have, of course, the identifying information, all clearly pointing, we believe, to the evidence that the Torah is divine. At the same time, if you recall, we told you that don't wait to be 100% convinced. Remember way back when Harry was going to the doctor and wondering whether to take that shot or not, he looks at the consequences and the evidence. And if the evidence, even if it's slightly more than even if it's only 54% or 60% evidence, if the consequences are equal, you kind of have to go with the evidence. So you're looking at that evidence and you're wondering about it, and it's starting to resonate and saying maybe it makes some sense. But there are some people out there that are still skeptical. So for that, we bring in the final piece. The final piece. So now we look at control. One example, an incredible example of God showing the complete control of the history of mankind. In order to do that, we need to begin to speak about one of the famous books of the scriptures. You know, there are 24 books of the scriptures, and all of them have certain similarities. We're going to speak today about one of my favorite books of the scriptures, and that is the book of Esther, as we call it, Megillat Esther. Now, the book of Esther is a fascinating story, a story about what happened to the Jewish people in Persia 2,400 years ago. And there were a lot of miracles at that time and amazing things that happened. We're going to look at some of them right now. But inside of it, there's some fascinating things that many people don't realize. Megillat Esther, now what does that mean? Everybody translated it as the book of Esther. But in fact, Megillat Esther is a little bit different than that. Megillat, what does that word Megillah mean? Well, that comes from a derivative of the word Gilui, legalot, and that means to reveal. So it doesn't mean a book. It actually means not a scroll, but to reveal. What about Esther? Is anybody out there by the name Esther? What is the root of the name Esther? Esther, Seser. Seser. Seser means hidden. Seser means that something is concealed. Megillat Esther really means not just the scroll of Esther, but revealing something that is concealed, something that's hidden. And that is what we're going to do right now. And in order to do that, we have to look at the scroll of Esther, at the Megillat Esther. So let's do that. Let's take a look at the scroll of Esther and see exactly what we're talking about, okay? We're going to look at the scroll of Esther, and we're going to look at exactly as it looks in front of you over there, and you see that that's the way it is written. This is the 9th chapter of the book of Esther, and if you see it, you can see that there's some unusual writing over there. The scrolls are written by hand on parchment by scribes meticulously, and there are scrolls that go back 500 years, 700 years, 800 years. Wherever you want to go in museums, you'll find a Megillat Esther. And you'll see that what I'm about to show you is exactly the way it appears in every Megillah. What you look in front of you is the writing, the Hebrew writing of the Megillah. Let's take a look at the English translation so we get a better idea of what exactly it is saying, and read along with me. And the Jews struck at all their enemies with the sword and with slaughter and destruction, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. This is in chapter 9, as I say. At this time, the Jews have finally won. They've won all their battles. Everything is fine, wonderful. And the Megillah is telling us something amazing. And in Shushan, the capital of Persia, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, including Parshandata, and Dalphana, and Aspata, and Parata, and Adalia, and Aridata, and Parmashta, and Arisa, and Aridai, and Vaizata, the 10 sons of Haman. So they destroyed 500 men, including the 10 sons of Haman. Is everybody clear now? You have to be clear about this in order to appreciate what you're about to see. The Jews have destroyed 500 men. They slew and destroyed those men, including the 10 sons of Haman. Fine. But take a look at the next slide, and you're about to see something really, really amazing. Right after that, it tells us, that same day, the number of those killed in Shushan, the capital, was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, in Shushan, the capital, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men, including the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? What is your request now? It shall be granted to you. What is your petition further? It shall be fulfilled. Now, you have to know something that's interesting about the Megillat Esther. There is something unique about that book that no other book in the scriptures has. Does anybody know what that is? Well, what it is that in the entire Megillat Esther, Hashem, God's name, is never mentioned. Imagine, it's a book of the scriptures. You would think it's got full of God's name. Nope, God's name isn't even there at all. So, of course, all the rabbis pounce on this and they say, what's going on? How could you have a book of the scripture without God's name? They said, well, we have an answer. You know, the rabbis always have an answer. We have an answer to it. Here's the explanation. Let's see if you like this. The explanation that they gave was that God's name really is in the book of Esther. But, like so many other things, it too is hidden. Well, sounds like, one of those cop-out answers. It too is hidden. Where is God's name hidden and how can you hide it? So that's this one of their explanations. The explanation is that if I want to mention the name of the king at the time of the story of Purim, the name of the king was Achashverosh. Say that over 10 times fast. Achashverosh. And if I want to refer to the king Achashverosh in the Megillah, I could write it several ways. For instance, if I want to refer to the president of the United States, I could say President Trump, or I could say Mr. Trump, or I could say the president. Same thing with Achashverosh. I could say Hamelech Achashverosh, or I could say his name, Achashverosh, or I could say just Hamelech, the king. And we know that it's Achashverosh. So the rabbi said, God's name is hidden in there. Because if it refers to the king Achashverosh, it'll say his name, or King Achashverosh, Hamelech Achashverosh. But sometimes it just says Hamelech. It just says the king. When it says the king, that's a veiled reference to God himself. He is the king of the world. So let's take a look at that paragraph that I just read to you and see if we know what the rabbis are talking about. See if it makes sense, because I think you may have some questions about how serious that is. So take a look at it. That same day, the number of those killed in Shushan, the capital, was reported to the king. Here it says the king. The king said to Queen Esther, it doesn't say Achashverosh, it just says the king, as if we're talking about God. So what happens over here? The king says, what is your request to Esther? You've already won. Anything you want, it's a platinum American Express card, furs, yachts, jewelry, anything you want there. What is your petition further? It shall be fulfilled. Look at this stunning answer. The answer Esther gives truly is incredible. She says, Esther replied, if it pleases the king, allow the Jews of Shushan to do tomorrow as they have done today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. Well, what is going on? Did we not see just a short time ago, did we not see that indeed the 10 sons of Haman were already killed? The 10 sons of Haman, we read them all. They already were killed. Esther is asking to hang dead men, hang 10 dead men. That's the request. And furthermore, if the king really means God, she's asking God to hang 10 dead men. That's a pretty neat trick. But God's supposed to come down with the big hand and pick them up. And why is she doing this? That's what she asks for. Perhaps this is the chilling answer to what Esther was really asking for. Do tomorrow as they have done today. Take a look at the New York Times. October 16th, 1946. Goring ends life by poison. 10 others hanged in Nuremberg prison for Nazi war crimes. Doomed men on gallows pray for Germany. 1946, the Nuremberg trials. I was not alive at that time, but I read about it, studied it, a lot of people did. And here it is, New York Times reporting us. 10 Nazis hanged in Nuremberg prison. How many sons of Haman were hanged? 10. How many Nazis were hanged at Nuremberg? 10. Now, there was, as you see, Goring ends life by poison. So there was an additional Nazi who committed suicide. Does anybody here know, does anybody watching know, you're aware of one additional child that Haman had? Yes, Haman had an 11th child. It was a daughter, 10 sons, 1 daughter. What do we know about Haman's daughter? Well, there's only one story that I've ever heard about Haman's daughter. And anybody you ask, anybody that you meet, you say, what about Haman's daughter? What happened? They will all tell you the same thing, because only one story is known about her. You see, she was a big fan of her father's. She was very excited. She found out that Haman was supposed to be regaled in the streets in a parade, and Mordecai, the poor Jew, was going to lead him on the horse. So in her little apartment, which is a couple of stories up, whatever that was, she had prepared what we call a little chamber pot. and she was going to disgrace the poor Jew. When the parade was going to come by in front of her window, she was going to drop the pot on the poor Jew Mordechai, unbeknownst to Haman's daughter. Mordechai and Haman had switched places. You see, Mordechai was now found to be in favor with the king. Haman was not. Haman was actually leading Mordechai on the horse. She didn't know this. So when the parade comes by, in her delirium, she takes the chamber pot, tosses it over, and then looks out and sees that she's about to disgrace her very own father. And what does she do? She leaps from the window and commits suicide. 10 Nazis were hanged at Nuremberg. 1 commits suicide. 10 of Haman's sons were hanged. 1 daughter commits suicide. And in a recent book, it was found that Göring, the one who committed suicide, was actually a transvestite. He wore women's clothing under his Nazi uniform. Incredible. Do tomorrow as they have done today. Esther made a request. She asked for something to happen. We didn't know what it was. What does that mean, do tomorrow? And then, curiously, many, many, many years later, over 2,000 years later, in Nuremberg, almost the same thing happens. Fascinating, yes? But it's not over yet. Let's take a look at a calendar because we want to understand exactly what the historical significance was of that. Now, the hangings at Nuremberg took place in 1946. Now, what was the Hebrew name for 1946? Let's take a look at the calendar, and you're going to have to know a little bit Hebrew for this, but if you don't, I'm going to walk you through it so you don't have to worry, okay? And watch, take a look at it. You'll be amazed by it. We see the calendar, and we see that this is October 1946, and there is circled the date of October 16th. But on top it tells you that the Hebrew date was Tuf Shin Zayin. You see, there are no numerals in the Hebrew language. If you want to say 1, you have to say Aleph. If you want to say 2, you have to say Beis. So there are no numerals. But the way to say the Hebrew date, the Hebrew calendar, in Hebrew is Tuf Shin Zayin. That is the year of 5707. We're making this recording now in 5780. But in 5707, it was Tuf Shin Zayin. Now, what is the significance of the year of Tuf Shin Zayin? And why am I showing this to you and teaching you Hebrew? You have better things to do than that. I'm going to turn back to what we looked at the Megillah. You notice that before we saw that all of Haman's sons were written very, very large. Regular type was fine. But when it came to the Haman's sons, apparently Esther was very proud of that. And take a look, even if you cannot read Hebrew, you'll see that there are a lot of different letters, different configurations, and you'll see that there are different ways of writing each letter, and they're very, very large. However, and now hang on to your socks. However, 2,400 years ago, when Esther wrote this, she wrote them very, very large. And yet, at the same time, there were 3 letters that she wrote that are missized, very, very small. Tuf, Shin, and Zayin. The Tuf is in the first name. The Shin is in the 7th name, and the Zayin is in the last name. Tuf, Shin, Zayin. The incredible idea that Esther, for some reason, had those numbers, those letters, unique. The Tuf Shin Zayin is the exact date and year of the hangings at Nuremberg. Unbelievable. Mind you, these letters and these understanding that I just told you, these letters were sitting and totally misunderstood or not understood. For years and years and years, people grappled with it. Rabbis grappled with it. Why are the letters so small? Those 3 letters, what's the difference? Why did Esther do that? It was as if Esther was dictating to the scribes. They wanted very, very large. Let's be very, very excited about the hanging of Haman's son. Well, when you get to those tough, you make it a little small. When you get to the shin, and they would ask, is it Esther? I guess they asked, why? Why is that? Said, No reasons, no explanations given now. One day there'll be a discovery seminar and everything will be clear. But nothing happened until Tafshin Zayin, which was 1946. And then, when the hangings of Nuremberg came along, that was it. And people didn't even realize the association until about 20 years later, when the Hasidic rabbi said, wait a minute, Tafshin Zayin, that has significance. Those are the small letters, and that's the year at Nuremberg. Incredible. But some of you who are a little bit sharper may be wondering a little bit about what we're exactly saying about the Tafshin Zayin. Let's go back to the calendar because it's really fascinating. Let's take one more look at that same calendar and you'll see that it's not exactly the way I just said it. Because in fact, if you take a look at the calendar, you'll see that the year was 5707 and the Hebrew is Tafshin Zayin. Now, Tafshin Zayin does not exactly equal 5707. You see what the problem is? The problem is that there's no way to say 5,000 in the Hebrew year. You can only say Taf is the last letter of the alphabet. We have what's called gematria, numerical equivalence, and Taf is 400, and Shin is 300, and Zayin is 7. So that's close, it's 707, but it's not Taf Shin Zayin. Here we have Taf is 400, we have Shin is 300, we have Zayin equals 7. That equals to a total of 707, which is fine, wonderful. However, it doesn't equal to 5707. We want to get back to 5707. 5,000, but you can't write 5,000 in Hebrew. If I wanted to write 5,000 on a check, you want to send Yaakov Salomon a check for $5,000 because you love discovery. So how are you going to write that check in Hebrew? Well, you can't write 5,000. You're going to have to write a lot of letters. It's going to be all over. How do you do that? So we have a tradition. And the tradition is that when you're writing thousands, when you're writing it, you don't write that column. You leave off the 1,000 column. It's as if we're saying you should know which millennium you're in. You don't need to write that column, so we just drop it off. But think very carefully, because now it gets even better. You see, how many times in history have we had the year 707? Well, in the first time, which was 5,000 years ago, we had the year 707. And how was it written? Tafshin Zayin, because it was 707. But if what I'm saying is correct, then 1,000 years later, we had 1707. In the year 1707, we also wrote it Tafshin Zayin, because we leave off the 1,000 column. Then we had 2707. Then we had 3707. And 47, and then 57. So how many times in history have we had that year, Tafshin Zayin, 6 times? Count, 707, 17, 27, 37, 47, 57. We've had 6 times, just like since we're on that, in that millennia, 6 times we've had the year 707, or Tafshin Zayin. Why is that significant? Well, for very good reason. I'm going to show you why it's significant, and some people find it hard to believe, but it is true. You see, in fact, there are not just 3 missed-sized letters in the 10 sons of Haman. Take a look. We have the Tuf, we have the Shin, we have the Zayin, but in fact, there is one more. The Tuf, the Shin, the Zayin, and look at the bottom name, the Vav. The Vav. The Vav is also missized. It is larger than all the other letters. Only one letter is missized like that. There's only one letter, in fact, only one letter that is so large, and that's the Vav. And what is the numerical equivalent of Vav? 6. There are 4 letters missized. Kaf, Shin, and Zayin. 707. Which 707? We've had a few of them. Vav. The 6th one, that's 5707. That 5707, that is in fact the exact year of the hangings at Nuremberg. Now let's go back for a moment because there's something really fascinating. There's a picture on a previous slide that I showed you, and let's take a look at that picture because it is remarkable. See, that picture will show us something that you may be very, very surprised at. Let's see if we can go back, and we'll take a look, and you'll see that there was a picture. There was a picture in the very beginning, and it was a picture from the New York Times. That picture showed us, well, let's not go back. We don't have to go back and see it, but you'll see that it's true. That picture shows that there was a trial actually ended in 1946, and it was October 16th, 1946, when the hangings took place. But the trial ended in June of 1946, as the caption tells us. There was a caption of the picture over there that told us that in June 1946, that trial was over. Now, isn't that fascinating? It was over in 1946. And then it says that the reason that the Nazis were not hanged is because there were, quote, appeals for amnesty. You know, when I look at it, I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, and I heard so many stories, concentration camps, etc. And the Nuremberg trials was like somewhat of a solace that at least some of them were getting their due. But appeals for amnesty? What would, just let them go, these Nazi butchers, just let them, how can we understand appeals for amnesty? Of course, it wasn't granted, and eventually they were hanged a few months later. But why would that be? You know why, ladies and gentlemen? I believe that because the trial ended too early. It was June 1946. You know, in June of 1946, what was the Hebrew year of June 1946? It was not 5707. It was 5706. The year changes in Rosh Hashanah in September. Then it goes to 5707. It was still 5706. That would be Tuf Shin Vav. And if they had hanged those Nazis right after the trial ended, we would have nothing here. And I would be standing here and appealing to you and saying, ladies and gentlemen, look how close we came. 5706, and we just missed it. Esther was almost right. No. There were appeals for amnesty. Makes no sense. But the reason was because we had to wait. We had to wait until it was 5707. And once we waited until 5707, by the way, the hangings took place when? On Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah is the last day of Sukkot. And Hoshana Rabbah, according to our sages and tradition, we know is the day of judgment for the entire world. Hoshana Rabbah, a very holy day, 5707. And maybe that's why there were appeals for amnesty, because it couldn't have happened in 5706. You may find it hard to believe that we still have one piece left. There's still one more piece that will really shock you, because when I first saw it, I don't think I ever recovered from it. Newsweek. We're going to look at Newsweek, folks. Newsweek magazine, remember Newsweek magazine? Is it still around anymore? I don't think so. Newsweek magazine. They wrote an article about the Nuremberg trials, of course, October 28th, 1946. And this reporter was there. And he looked at all what was happening and then the 13 steps, you see it. You don't have to read the whole thing. Just take a look at the very last paragraph and get ready. The very last paragraph tells us, only Julius Streicher was one of the Nazis hanged. Only Julius Streicher went without dignity. He had to be pushed across the floor, wild-eyed and screaming Heil Hitler. Mounting the steps, he cried out, and now I go to God. He stared at the witnesses facing the gallows and shouted, Purim Fest, 1946. Folks, Purim Fest. You realize what he's saying? Purim ended 7 months before that. Purim doesn't fall out in October. When do we have Purim? In March, maybe February, but almost always in March. Here he is in October announcing Purim Fest. Purim, of course, was the day of the hangings of the 10 sons of Haman. Julius Streicher, his last words are saying exactly what I said. Julius Streicher connected the events of Purim when Haman's sons were hanged and the events of Nuremberg in 1946. How did he know? How did he understand that there was some connection? One thing I can tell you is that Julius Streicher never attended a discovery seminar. That's for sure. We showed you some pretty amazing things. Now we showed you a piece of the control that God has over the history of mankind. Remarkable. You're looking at home and you're watching and you're saying, what is this? What did we just see here? We saw here an incredible presentation that showed you, I believe, convincing evidence about the divine authorship of our Torah. And you're looking back and saying, well, maybe, and it's hard for you. And it's hard for you to be convinced, and it's hard for you to say, I have to follow this because this is God's word. I understand that. No question, I get it. But you may look at it and say, 3,332 years ago, that was a long, long time. That's so long ago. Mount Sinai, what happened over there. How can I relate to that? So let me suggest that you use a little bit of a different paradigm. And that is that going back to Mount Sinai, don't think of it as 3,300 years. Think of it in terms of generations. How many generations go back? About 133. About 133 generations. That's a number I can handle. So picture a stairway with 133 steps. And you say, that's how far back it goes. Well, you may look at me and say, well, I don't really have much to do with religious Jews and people who believe in the Torah. I understand that, but I want you to know that from those 133 steps going back to Sinai, you and I had a lot in common. The fact is that you and I were sitting on that same step for about 132 or 133, maybe 134 steps. But in the last couple of steps, the last couple of generations, we have parted. Something happened, but we shared a lot in common for a very, very long time. It's not that we're so different. It's not that we've been different for so long. It's just happened recently. Something happened, and it's hard. And we went astray. We understand that. But that's a much better way to look at it. The Talmud says that there was a great sage who used to live and be very, very careful with what he ate. And he used to plant carob seeds, carob trees. When he planted those carob trees, he used to say to himself, look, I know that you don't see fruit from carob trees for many years, but you know what? I'm not only planting them for myself, I'm planting them for the future. Some people are going to come into this world and they're going to see the carob trees that I planted. When I came into this world, I found carob trees that someone else planted. So it's not only for yourself. You have to consider about the generations to come. There's a big question in the world today. Who is a Jew? Great question. Who is a Jew? Here's a beautiful answer. Who is a Jew, one rabbi said, will not be determined by who your grandfather or grandmother was. Who is a Jew will be determined by who your grandchildren will be. That's a powerful statement. Something really to think about. Let me end with a personal story. Something that happened to me a number of years ago. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and I was in the famous Borough Park section of Brooklyn, and I was walking down the street, minding my own business, as they say, and as I walked by, somebody who I have never met in my entire life just looks at me and says, excuse me, are you going to the funeral? I turned around, I said, excuse me, what did you say? He says, are you going to the funeral? I said, what funeral? He says, the funeral. The funeral, Mr. Schachner. You're going to Mr. Schachner's funeral. I said, look, I don't know Mr. Schachner. I don't know the funeral. I don't know you. I don't know why I'm talking to you. And what's going on here? So he says to me, again, having never met me before and not knowing who I am or me not knowing him, he says to me, of course you know Mr. Schachner. what are you talking about? And then he explains to me that he has 3 daughters, and the 3 daughters are married. They don't have the name Schachner, and yes, I know all 3 of them. He says, his funeral is right here in the synagogue, right now. You should go in. So I said, oh, something eerie is going on here, and I'm getting a message that I should go in there, so I did. Turned around, walked right into the synagogue, sat in the back, and there was a funeral. And a man was standing up there, and he was talking about Mr. Schachner in the eulogy. And this is what he said. I'll never forget it. He said, Mr. Schachner was a devout member of this synagogue. He used to come every day and say the prayers every day, the Shachrit prayers. And he was a big, big part of this synagogue. And one day, says the man, I saw Mr. Schachner go out when he finished the prayers, and he walked outside, and I walked right behind him, and I saw that he went and did not go home. He went and he stood across the street at a bus stop. Okay, I thought nothing of it. The next day I went out and I happened to notice the same thing, and the next day the same thing, and the next day the same thing, and finally I got curious. And one day I said to him, Mr. Schachner, excuse me, but every day I see you come out of the synagogue and you go and you stand at the bus stop, but I don't think you're going to work. I think you're retired, isn't that right? And you live right around the corner, so may I ask, what are you doing at the bus stop? Mr. Schachner gave him an answer that I never forgot. He said, you have to understand, I came here right after World War II. I'm a survivor of the concentration camps. I thought I would never see the light of day again. Penniless, alone. After a while, I began to realize that, you know what? How are the Jewish people going to rebuild? The only way they're going to rebuild is with the youth. They have to teach them to appreciate Torah, appreciate what it means to be Jewish. So I happened to be standing at that time when I walked out of the synagogue at the bus stop, and from there, I saw a bus, a school bus, a yellow school bus carrying Jewish kids off to yeshiva. I said, that's beautiful. That's the most beautiful sight in the world, a bus stop taking kids to study Torah. So I waited another few minutes, and there's another bus came. And then another bus came, and then another. And this is Borough Park. And I started counting the buses. And that day, I counted 34 buses. I stood there and I went, that is unbelievable. 34 bus loads of kids going to study Torah. So the next day I came out and I said, wait a minute, I'm not going home. I'm going to that bus stop. And I went to the bus stop and I stood there and I started counting buses. And every day since then, I go to that bus stop and I count buses. That's how I start my day. And if there is one bus that's missing for some reason, I'm finished. That's how I start my day. You see, that's the future of the Jewish people. That's the answer. Now you know why I stand there. And ladies and gentlemen, that's why I stand here. The same reason. I look out and speak to people all over the world and I say, you got to get on the bus. It's all about education. It's not about completely changing your life around tomorrow. That stuff doesn't work. It's about getting an education, finding out what is this Torah really about? What is its power? How do we understand its longevity? How do we understand the survival of the Jewish people throughout the millennia? To me, the greatest miracle in the history of mankind. Just the fact that you and I are still here. How are we supposed to understand that? Without an education, you can't. My message to you throughout Discovery is pretty simple. Get on the bus. There's a lot of ways to educate yourself today. It doesn't have to be formal education. You can do it online. You could do it on a website, h.com. You can do it with English books. There are so many. There are so many lectures and places you can go, even if you're home. There's so many ways to look at it. All I'm saying to you is don't throw it away until you find out what you already have. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for coming to Discovery. You'll never forget it.